This is a Sports Catastrophe production.
Hey there, Heather, ho there, it's Jeff Cutter, and welcome you to another Sports Catastrophe birthday boy. Yeah, right. It's Sports Catastrophe on this day, August the 12th. And a major moment happened on this day, 1994. I always remember August 12th being both a good day and a bad day. The good day was when I actually got qualified for a trip to the Bahamas for sports trivia in 2009. But the whole event went for bust. Pissing me off in the process, but that's just me. Anyway, then the bad one was 1994 when the strike happened. So the 1994 MLB strike was huge. Baseball had some labor problems. Many people wouldn't predict how big this baseball strike would affect the other sports leagues, but it did. So, anyhow, the 93 season ended great, especially if you were a Canadian baseball fan, as Joe Carter hit a home run in the bottom of the ninth to sink the Philadelphia Phillies and to sink Vic Williams' career. The 94 season would have major changes. One common misconception about the 94 baseball strike was that, after the baseball strike, that's when they went with the 6 divisions and the wild card format. But the wild card playoffs would have been in 1994. They agreed that after the 93 season, they would split up the teams into 6 divisions. The AL would still have their 14 teams. Or is it? Yeah. The AL would still have their 14 teams. The NL would still have their 12 teams at the time. No, sorry. Then they moved up to 14. Both leagues had 14 teams. 2 divisions in the AL and 2 in the NL would have 5, and the other one would have 4. But it was different. The AL East and Central had 5 teams. The AL West had 4. In the NL, it was the West that had 4 teams instead of the East and Central. Oh no, I think it was set up that way. What am I thinking? So the realignment happened in 94. In the East, there would be Baltimore, Boston, New York, Detroit, and Toronto. And before you say anything, yes, Detroit played in the AL East for many seasons, but then they moved to the AL Central in 1998 because Milwaukee was enticed to move from the AL to the NL after 98 brought in 2 new teams, Arizona and Tampa. So instead of one league having instead of the leagues both having 15 teams, the NL would have 16 teams and the AL would have 14. Kind of pathetic, don't you think? Because they didn't want interleague to happen every time. But once Houston moved to the AL West in 2013, then they decided to say, let's do interleague throughout whatever. It would be healthy and healthy. What can you do? So anyway, the AL Central had Cleveland, Kansas City, the Chi Sox, Milwaukee before they moved to the NL 98, and Kansas City or Minnesota. I can't remember what I said. But the AL West had Texas, Oakland, California / Anaheim Angels, and Seattle. The NL East were aligned to Atlanta, Montreal, Philly, the Mets, and Florida. The Central had Chicago, the Cubs, Cincy, Houston, St. Louis, and Pittsburgh. And the NL West had LA, San Francisco, San Diego, and Colorado. If you win your division, you're in the playoffs. And then the team with the best record that didn't win the division would get in as a wild card. Now, at the time, the wild card could not face the 4 seed, but they can't face the 1 seed if they're from the same division. So for context, the Yankees, who were the best team in 94 in the AL before the strike happened, actually would, if a wildcard team like Boston or Toronto would get out, they couldn't face the Yankees in the first round because they're both in the same division. So they would play the second best team, probably Cleveland. And we might. So it was huge, like all that. 93 was kind of called the last great pennant race as the Giants and Braves were fighting for the NL West title. It was kind of weird to see Atlanta in the NL West. I mean, they're right by the Atlantic Ocean. Georgia's right by the Atlantic Ocean. But anyway, the Giants were screwed over on the final day as one name would strike fear: Dusty Baker, or, to be honest, Solomon Torres. So the 94 season was there, but there was labor problems. Despite all that, there was a very good All-Star game that actually broke the American League's stranglehold on it for a time being. But then August 12th came and the strike came. So people thought that maybe the strike was going to last a few days. The last strike that ruined the regular season was 1985, when for 2 days in August 6th and 7th, 1985, there was a strike. But thankfully, that was only the 2 days. So baseball was saved. The Blue Jays lost the game because of that, but 99 wins and the bitch ain't won. So anyway, yeah, there was still labor problems. They were talking. It was about the salary cap and compensation and all that stuff. Unfortunately, though, the owners were kind of the bad guys in a sense. Although the players wanted more money and all that because of a different financial climate at that time. September 1994 was the death blow. As Major League Baseball said, there would be no 94 season, no regular season games and playoffs. And then there was rumors that the 95 season would be affected, which it did. The 95 season would not start till April 20th. Unfortunately, that was also the same day as the Oklahoma City bombing of so many people in the Edward Morrow building, or whatever you call it, in Oklahoma City. Of course, if it wasn't for one Sonia Sotomayor, who became a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, became a Justice of the Supreme Court thanks to Barack Obama, we probably not would have had baseball. Also, add the fact that the Blue Jays would have been hosed because the province of Ontario at the time had a thing that prevented replacement players, aka scabs, from taking over jobs for striking workers. So the Blue Jays would have had to probably play in Dundee for the time being with replacement players. There were a few replacement players like Bill Miller and I can't remember anyone else who unfortunately would not get their names on baseball, on like MVP Baseball 2005. Anyway, the replacement players were huge. Yeah, replacement players. MJ almost became a replacement player, but he decided to stay away from the thing and not cross the picket line. And at that time, he decided to go back to basketball. And those fans are happy he did. And the NBA, for that matter, too. So the 94 strike would affect many teams and many players. There were players who were affected. Yeah, they lost their paychecks, but there were players in the National League chasing records. Jeff Bagwell and Matt Williams were making a tear for Roger Marison's 61 home run season back in that had been done in 1961. Could Marison's record be broken? They were both on a decent pace. And also the fact, would Tony Gwynn of the Padres get the first 400 batting season since Ted Williams in 1941? He was at 390 at that time, and it looked like he was aiming for it. For context, John Olerud was batting 400 in August of 93 before he fell down the chute. But he still won the batting title. Thank God for that. So yeah, so individual records were being stamped and all that, but team stuff would be huge. If you look at the American League, the team that was mostly affected could have been the Yankees. I mean, after all, the Yankees had been to the playoffs since 1981, and they had some young, strong talent. And Don Mattingly, Donnie Baseball, their emotional captain, would have been in the playoffs for the first time ever. However, thankfully, though, the Yankees in 95 would make the playoffs, and Mattingly played in that one, and hit a monster home run in Game 2 of the LDS against the Mariners. But in the end, it was all for naught as the Mariners won the series in 5. So anyway, the Yankees were the top team in the East. The Central had a dogfight between the Chicago White Sox, who won the 93 AL Central title, and the Cleveland Indians, who were basically trying to end decades of futility. All that. They had a new ballpark. They had some new players like Dennis Martinez was there. Cleveland had a good pitching staff. They had Albert Bell like smacking home runs like there was no tomorrow. Cleveland looked good. Cleveland and the White Sox easily both would have went to the playoffs. I think Cleveland had the lead at the 94 juncture. Central at the juncture. But Cleveland and Chicago would have both made the playoffs. But the AL West was a disaster. The Texas freaking Rangers would have won the playoffs. Okay, it's not a knock on the Rangers per se. It's a knock on the fact that how I did. The standings were, the White Sox were one game up on the Indians for the AL Central. The Indians would have qualified as the wild card. The Yankees had a 6.5 game lead on the Orioles in the AL East. But the AL West was a disaster. Despite the fact that Texas, Oakland, Seattle, and California were within 5.5 games of each other, Texas would have won the division. That's the good news. The bad news is their record. They were 52-62 at the time. Let me repeat that. 52-62. So Texas was 10 games below 500. How many teams would have won the AL West if it wasn't, if they were in the AL West? If you look at the teams in the AL East, every team, even the last place Detroit Tigers, the Blue Jays were 55-60, but they were third technically in the division. Every AL East team, Baltimore, Toronto, Boston, and Detroit would have won the AL West. And look at the AL Central: Cleveland, Kansas City, Minnesota, and Milwaukee. So every AL East and Central team, not named Yankees, White Sox, or Indians, would have won the AL West. That's how bad it was. Texas was the 11th best team in the AL based on their winning percentage. Oakland, Seattle, and California were the lowest ones. That would have been weird if Texas, at 10 games below 500, would have won the playoffs. 10 games below 500. So in 162 games, they would have won 76. All right, so of the four teams that would have made the playoffs in 94, Yankees, White Sox, Indians, and Rangers. The Yankees and Indians would make playoffs in 95. Yankees had a strong 2-0 series lead in the LDS against the Seattle Mariners and choked it with 3 games being in Seattle. Well, Seattle had the advantage because Seattle won the division and got to have 3 games. The Yankees were, quote unquote, the wild card because Boston won the AL East and had to take on the AL Central champion Cleveland Indians. Cleveland would get to the 95 finals but lose to another team that would have made playoffs in 94, the Atlanta Braves, in 6 games. Texas would actually have a year of cooling off, but in 96 they did win the AL West, and in 98 as well. So, But when you look at the National League, the teams that would have made the playoffs, Atlanta definitely would have made it in as a wild card. So it was Montreal, Atlanta, Cincy, and Los Angeles would have made the playoffs. Houston was actually only a half game back of Cincy for the NL Central, but by November 12th, the Reds did have with 1 game fewer played. It would have been funny if Cincy had played that game and then lose to somebody, and then Houston would have faced Cincy. Houston was big. The Dodgers were only 2 games above 500 when they won the division. So Houston would have won the AL West if they were in the NL West. It was basically dumbfoundedness. I mean, of the 4 teams that made the NL playoffs, that would have made the playoffs in 94, all but one would have made the playoffs in 95. Cincy won the NL Central. We're a decent team. They won the NLDS against the LA Dodgers in 95. Got to the NLCS, but lost to the Braves, who then subsequently won the World Series. But no team and no storyline was bigger than the downfall of the Montreal Expos. You look at the 94 Montreal Expos. They were actually not that good to start the season. People forget that they struggled in April and May. They only were 4 games above 500 at the end. No, sorry, there were 6 games above 500 at the end of May and not doing so well. But by June, they were huge. It all started with a series against the Braves in late June when they took 2 out of 3 against them. The funny thing about the Expos post-May 94 was their road record. After May, they went 28-7 on the road. That's a clip of 750, aka winning 3 out of every 4 games on the road. At home, they were okay. In June, July, and August, they were 18-11, but on the road, they were road warriors. That was a shock, and all that. So the Expos were the best team and would have probably played the LA Dodgers. You're thinking, oh wait, Atlanta's the wildcard team. They would play Montreal. But as I said, Atlanta and Montreal were in the same division. So guess what? They couldn't face each other. So it would have been Expos Dodgers and then Reds Braves. Expos might have faced the Braves in the NLCS and would have won narrowly. So look at the roster of the 94 Expos. Their pitching staff: Danny Boucher being the first Quebec born, being a hero being from Quebec. Jeff Osaro, who was a pretty decent guy. He even went 10-0 to start his MLB career. Ken Hill, who was this great starter that the Cardinals picked, traded to Montreal for Andres Galarraga. He looked good. Pedro Martinez. This was the first year Pedro was with the Expos, as he was dealt from Los Angeles in the offseason for the one Delano to Shields. Mal Rojas, a pretty good closer. Kurt Reeder, Tim Scott, Jeff Shaw, John Wetland. They had 3 very solid closing pitchers in one roster. Kind of reminds me of the 1990 Reds, which ironically, oh no, Shaw wasn't on that team. Anyway, their catchers, well, they had Darren Fletcher, who was picked up from Philly in 91. Their infielders were good. Will Cordero, Cliff Floyd, Sean Berry, Mike Lansing. That was basically the infield of the Expos in 94. The outfield had some very good names: Moises Alou, Marcus Grissom, Larry Walker, and Rondell White. It was shocking that, there were 4 key outfielders, and one of them couldn't even, and, you can only have 3 outfielders. So it was like, what can you do? Rondell White, I think, played first base for a little bit too. Memory serves me right in that one. Felipe Alou led the team, and they looked good. Felipe Alou basically was an icon. And the 94 Expos looked like they were going to end years of frustration, because Montreal had, by 79, finally came through, and then the Pirates knocked them out for the playoff, for the division. 1980, they lost the final week of the season to the Phillies. 81, they made the playoffs because of the split season format. Otherwise, they would not have been in the playoffs, and then lost on Blue Monday. And then they went downhill, and then by 92 and 93, they actually were runners-up in the division to Pittsburgh and Philly, respectfully. And then by 94, they were just fantastic. It's amazing. The 94 Expos, how good they would have been. The strike killed their momentum, yes. But what's more is that the strike did more harm than you think. Well, a lot of baseball purists would know this about the 95 season, about the Expos. But hey, most of you don't know much. In 95, the Expos were in financial ruin. They were owned by a consortium, that's for one thing. And the 94 strike ruined revenue. They would have had good home revenue. They would have had playoff revenue. Even if they lost in the LDS, they would have had decent revenue from the Canadian broadcasters, CBC and TSN, and basically would have earned a lot of money. And maybe Montreal would not have had financial problems. Of course, because of the loss of that revenue, Montreal owners had to cut salaries whenever possible. So within 4 days, they purged their squad of 4 franchise key players. Ken Hill was sent back to St. Louis. Marcus Grissom was traded to Atlanta for Tony Tarasco? Really? John Wetland was traded to the Yankees for one Roberto Kelly. And Larry Walker, well, he wasn't traded, but he was allowed to leave as a free agent, and he signed for Colorado and helped them to the 95 playoffs. Lest we forget. So that was hard. It was really hard to realize it. That the Expos basically had to be blown up. Subsequently, their seasons were not that good. 95 obviously was not that good. 96, they were chasing for the wild card by the end of the season, but they failed. 97, they seemed to have good momentum. I mean, heck, they beat the Blue Jays in the first Expos Blue Jays series ever, winning 2 out of 3 during Canada Day weekend. stating that, Pedro Martinez and Jeff Juden were good pitchers and all that. But Montreal would not challenge for a playoff spot till 2003. And at that time, they were really in ruins. 99, Brochu finally sold the club to Jeffrey Loria, who tried twice to get the Expos. Loria basically was a terrible owner. He decided to roll the dice a couple times. And, especially picking up a decade of Rabu. Man. The worst part for Loria under his tenure was that Montreal lost the English and French TV deals and also lost radio deals in 2000. So basically, the Expos had no TV and no radio coverage unless it came from an opposing team. Of course, Dave Van Horn would have to do games via internet. Of course, the internet in 2000 is a lot different than the internet in 2021. Not to do that. They did get TV deals with the Score and TSN/RDS. 2001. But by 2002, the Expos were in trouble. Loria sold the team back to Major League Baseball for money. Loria used that money to buy the Marlins from John Henry, who then decided to buy a portion of the Boston Red Sox to be their general owner. So MLB had the Expos and wanted to contract, thinking that 30 teams was too much. Maybe we should go down to 28. So Montreal was doomed to fail after 2002. But it failed because the second team that was allegedly to be picked, and it was revealed to be the Minnesota Twins, caused a big enough stink that they couldn't contract just one team. So, yeah, they couldn't do it. And the Expos by 2003 actually shockingly went through the final month of the year getting almost in the wild card hunt. Of course, they had to deal with the AL Central, which was sloppy because Houston, St. Louis, and the Cubs were all fighting for it. And maybe that consolation prize is a wild card. But the Expos were bare bones. Loria stole everything from the Expos organization to take to the Marlins organization, including the roast beast. And Omar Minaya was made to fix it on a shoestring budget. Unfortunately, the shoestring budget would ruin the Expos. Well, for one day, they had to play home games in Puerto Rico, which somehow outdrew Expo games in Montreal. Fuck. And second of all, was that at the September 1st deadline, you can call up some players. The Expos were not allowed to because of budgetary reasons, and that's why they slipped and fell in September 2003. Worst of all for the Expos was that Loria won the World Series in 2003 with the Marlins as owner. What's even worse is that Vladdy Guerrero left by free agency to the Angels, and basically that was the last good player for the Expos. Montreal basically played a lame duck season, and by the time their final home game happened, it was revealed that Montreal was going to move to Washington, and the fans were not happy. Losing to Loria and the Marlins 9-1 in their final home game ever was just sucky. They did move to Washington. Washington was a decent fit. They basically rebuilt from the ground up, getting Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg as number one picks in the draft. But their playoff futility basically was karma by Expo fans until 2019 when the Nationals won the World Series, pissing me off, of course. So, yeah, the Expos were really hit hard. And it didn't help matters that Bud Selig didn't sometimes really care about the Expos. I curse his name for now. I mean, at least the new commissioner, Rob Manfred, is making noise saying, hey, Montreal might get a team in the future. There's rumors that Tampa might move to Montreal or play a split season in Montreal. Might not happen. So anyway, yeah, no team and no player was hit hard than the 94 Expos to do the strike. And oh yeah, as I said before, I talked about the 94 season bringing unrest in other professional leagues. It's true. Because the 94 baseball strike, when it happened, it started a chain of command that in 1994, all four major sporting leagues were hit hard. Hockey had that lockout, of course, that bit them till January 1995. Football nearly struck, and then, of course, with the salary cap, because of free agency, that many players had to be let go. Phil Simms had to retire. It was just not good. And basketball nearly got a delayed start. Thankfully, they got everything done by the start of the 94-95 season, and that basketball started on time. So yeah, it was the year of labor strike. And of course, the 94 baseball strike was parodied in the Married with Children, which forward with major league stars such as Brett Butler, Brett Saberhagen, Frank Thomas, and I think a few others. Actually, were in menial jobs because of the baseball strike. And then, Al and his group of merry men, if you will, had a baseball league, and that was capturing national attention. But unfortunately, the owners, aka the owner of the nudie bar, which sponsored Al's team, got trouble. And then Al says, "Show me your books that you're losing money and all that." And they said, "No, we won't do that." And then, of course, that league ends, and they say over the radio about how the NHL was on strike in baseball. It's like, where will it end? I often wonder about that. Yeah, it was the year that labor strike really screwed everyone over. Not good, not good. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.